Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today we have an interview with one of the leading Christian barristers responsible for defending Christian freedoms in this country. We'll be discussing the government announcement of banning Hamas and its entirety, and also the plight of Christians escaping from the Taliban in Afghanistan. Warm welcome to the programme, and today's guest is Paul Diamond, who's a Christian barrister all the way from Cambridgeshire. Paul, warm welcome to the Middle East Report.
Pleased to be here. Good to see you again, Simon. So glad to be here.
And Paul, I know that we've done a number of programmes together, including you doing a number of Zoom programmes we've been doing, but it's been a while since you've been on the Middle East Report. But firstly, just want to say on behalf of our viewers, thank you so much for all that you've done to defend Christian freedoms and liberties in this country, and thanks to you, we can preach the gospel, that we can be strong in our faith because you've done so much to protect our Christian freedoms. You've also stood up for Israel and protected Israel, and that needs to be acknowledged. But can we start, where did it all begin for you? Tell us about your childhood, growing up. Tell us when you came to faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, and when did you have this passion and interest for law?
Right, well, big question. First, people don't know, well, they probably may know, I'm Jewish ethnically, if I could put it that way, and I've got family in Israel, but I've got all the right pedigree, if I could put it that way. My mother was a kinder transporter from then Czechoslovakia. She was from Prague, and she was went on a SEAL train organised by Sir Nicholas Winton.
Amazing.
So she's one of his chosen. I think he took out 688. So my mother, was one of the 688 Sir Nicholas Winton selected, and I know what a brutal job that is because I've had some experience with that myself. I'll come to that when we talk about Afghanistan and Syria. And you had, in those days, you had to be adopted and have care provided for you by private families. So my mother was adopted by a Church of Scotland clergyman. He may have had, I think he had some leanings to We Free, and therefore she was brought up in Scotland at a clergyman's girls' school, although she came here not speaking a word of English. And my mother then went on to be, I think in 1948, one of the 5 women doctors called to practice medicine. Only 5 women were called. So it's a bit of a Jewish tale, come here not speaking a word and then become a doctor. So I always say I'm more diverse than anyone could ever imagine. I'm Jewish, Christian, Czech, Scottish and English, all rolled into one. So before it all got vogue, before you could claim every tab you were a member of in every group, I had them all. So that's really my background. I think it was a bit difficult at school, I do remember, because I used to go to the, I think it was the Jewish Assembly 3 days a week, because I was from Golders Green, and the state schools, the states I went to, had Jewish assemblies organised. And I went to the Christian Assembly 2 days a week, and it caused the school utter confusion, and it caused all the pupils utter confusion. And I think, if I say it rather crudely, you can't quite, and didn't quite fit in with the Jewish club, because it is a bit of a club, but they were always very polite and looked at me a bit like a strange animal. He's just come from the Christian Assembly. And if I said actually the Christians were probably more hostile, especially in those days, there was a lot of hostility to Jews, but all my good, close, lifelong friends came from the Christian camp, if that made sense. So that, but it was sort of a bit of a sort of roller coaster at school as well.
And when did you profess your?
Well,
such an important question.
Yeah, well, the date. Well, there's a couple of dates, but the date I've formally taken is April the 26th, 1980. So everyone's going to work out my age now. It's going to be scandalous, but I was 19. And it was before the Reverend Maurice Bowler, who's since passed away. And that was a very important event in my life. And, I had all these sort of conflicting things. But there was never a moment I didn't believe in God, but that was the moment I made the choice, if that makes sense.
And where does your passion and interest from law come from? What was it that sparked your interest in wanting to pursue a very successful career in law? I mean, success not in terms of money, but in success.
Yeah, I was going to qualify you on that quite brutally. I think what I would say was, it was always burning within me. I think many young Christians have this. You're going to do something significant. You're going to really serve the Lord. But I do feel there were a couple of things I will say on the road. I did ask the Lord what I wanted to do, and I felt He said to me, well, you can do whatever you want to do. You can have an easy life if you want to. I don't really care. Or you can have this hard life. And I said, I'll take the hard life. And it may have been one of the most foolish decisions I ever made. And so I will say it has been a hard life, and it's called quite a few times, I would say, for judgment calls of whether you are going to have integrity or not, and we're going to do what you believe is right or wrong. And there's been a lot of brutal decisions down the way. So I think once you kick on that road, you don't get off it. And it did become a calling in my life. And I started very early on. I was barrister to the Keep Sunday Special campaign, which was tremendous fun. We used to, I'm not sure I should say it's national television, but some of us used to call it the Keep Sunday Boring campaign. But we actually very much enjoyed it. I was very young then, and it was, as I didn't appreciate how important it was at the time. I remember we had a talk once about the importance of the Sabbath day, and it wasn't one of these sort of, this is what the Bible says, we don't think, we do think, and why. And one of the themes that came out of that discussion, and this was in 1988 or 87, I remember it, and Mrs. Thatcher was Prime Minister, the country was functioning, and courts worked, and freedom of speech and freedom of religion was just accepted facets of the quiet, genteel British way of life. And they said, one of the speakers said, the assault on the Sundays is the growth of the secularism, and in 20 or 30 years' time this will take root. We will be losing our freedoms. We will lose not just the freedom of Christians, but everybody, freedom of speech. And I remember that. And I remember, as I said, I sort of almost laughed to myself. Mrs. Thatcher was Prime Minister, but so true. And then after that, I was involved in the establishment of Christian Concern and did a number of cases for them over the years, some of them very well known, some not so well known. It was quite an adventure, that was. And I've now sort of moved on, and I'm sort of wondering what the next stage is for God in my life. So I'm going to do that. And I think the only thing I would say is, you're asking me about my background. I think I was very much cut out to this type of work. And the reason I say that, being a Jew is a bit like being in the theatre of the absurd non-stop. So, there's sort of a total irrational hatred either of the Jews or of the state of Israel, whichever the latest evolving of the hatred form it takes, and it's very it's very extreme to a Jew. You can sort of see a Labour Party conference, I think in 2017, covered in Palestinian flags. Wouldn't have a Union Jack in it. I would have loved to have been there and unrolled an Israeli flag right in the middle of it and exposed them. And we've recently had this cricket player how many lives have been destroyed because someone tweeted something 10 years ago they regret? This cricket player's tweeted anti-Semitic tweets, but nothing will happen. That's a given. And not that I want anything to happen. I think it's all rather silly, but it exposes the hypocrisy. But what it did for me is it set me up for these absurd judgments and these. Well, I've had sort of, by then 40 years of madness. The Christians were experiencing the madness, but I could steady them and say, let's get on with the appeal. This was water off a duck's back, some of this totally irrational, illogical conclusion by a judge.
Paul, we're discussing Israel in this programme, and it's been clear over the last decade that law has been used as a weapon against the nation of Israel. A term that's used as lawfare, and also the legal system used to target Israel. Can you explain to us, our viewers as well, what is lawfare and how has law been manipulated in order to attack the Jewish state of Israel?
Well, lawfare, and I can't say I'm not unfamiliar with its uses, is the taking of politics into the legal forum, and it's really politics continuation by another means. Now, you don't often expect to win the case because the case is normally has very limited legal grounds, but what it does seek to do is expose your party and embarrass them. One of the main methods of lawfare against Israel with Britain is, the whole issue of what we have of hate speech, media reporting, the sort of, as I recently discussed, the sort of sanctification of the anti-Israel movement, international arrest warrants against visiting Israelis, boycotts, cancelling, intimidation, which is the main fear. And I think, unfortunately, very often the Jews tend to be the canaries in the mine shaft. People didn't mind, but now you can't say anything, and people's events are shut down. So it is used, and it is a problem.
Paul, what do you make of the latest government announcement that the British government, as said by our Home Secretary Priti Patel, that the British government is going to outlaw Hamas in its entirety? So that's both its political wing and now its military wing. Yeah.
Well, obviously, I think most people's reaction is about time. Thank goodness they've done it. There's a few things just to say on that. Well, everybody knows Hamas is a terrorist organisation. It's no different from a Nazi party. How the left flock to it is beyond me. Their language is never Israelis or Israel. Their charter, their speeches refers to Jews, and that everybody knows it's an anti-Semitic organisation. It's been whitewashed by the media repeatedly. If any backbench Knesset MP said a tenth of what they said, most of our mainstream media would be frothing with the rage that they pass over every day with Hamas. So again, it was the beginning of it. I think there's just to say a few points. Governments do have to speak with bodies in power. You don't have to like the Chinese communists running their concentration camps. You don't have to like the Burmese. Governments do have to have channels of power. But I think what is concerning is what Hamas represent is this extreme Islamic hatred. And it's not just hatred of Jews. It may start with the Jews. There may be a particular hatred for the Jews, but it's directed at all non-Muslims, including Christians. And this force is growing very large in Britain. It's not been addressed. It's been avoided. In fact, in the last 2 weeks, we've had a Conservative member of Parliament killed for simply express disagreement with his views. He was knifed savagely, and it's 1,000 times worse than the invasion of the Congress. 1,000 times worse. And the Americans don't let go of that, but they may have their own reasons. We're just passing over it. and we've had a bomb attack in Liverpool. It's a very serious problem, and we have freedom of speech on it. And I think Hamas and Hezbollah are expressions in Britain, not of freedom movements, but of these very violent racist movements.
Absolutely. So let's go to my good friend Eric Stakelbeck from his programme called The Watchman, where he's talking about the latest British government announcement to ban Hamas in its entirety, both the military wing that was banned in 2001 and now the political wing that's been banned in 2021.
Hey folks, Eric Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman newscast. We start today with some very good news. Great Britain has banned the terrorist organization Hamas. Now you may be watching this right now and scratch your head and think, Hamas, they're not banned already? Well, as a matter of fact, in Great Britain, the British government until today considered Hamas essentially to be two separate factions, a military wing and a political wing. Now, the Hamas military wing obviously are jihadists who launch rockets at Israel on a practically daily basis and have sparked several wars with the Jewish state and, of course, backed by the Iranian regime. But Britain considered Hamas's political wing to be the leadership of the movement in Gaza right now. And look, we have Hamas quote-unquote dignitaries that visit various capitals around the world, meeting with diplomats and even world leaders. So Britain kind of made a differentiation there between the political and military wings, which they should not have. Terrorists are terrorists, whether they wear suit and tie or camouflage. And today, Britain thankfully corrected the mistake and banned the entire Hamas movement on UK soil. Now, Britain's Foreign Minister Priti Patel made the announcement today and spoke in Washington, D.C. about this decision to ban Hamas activity on British soil. Hey, folks, better late than never. What took you so long is probably what a lot of people are thinking, obviously, after the Hamas track record, untold amounts of blood on its hands, not only Israeli blood, but dozens of U.S. citizens killed by Hamas. I'm sure that British citizens have been slaughtered by Hamas as well over the years, not only with the rocket attacks, tens of thousands of rockets launched by Hamas out of Gaza against Israeli civilian population centers over the past several years, but also the terror tunnels, the suicide bombings, of course, from 2000 until 2006 during the Second Intifada, and of course that sponsorship from the Iranian regime. So a long and bloody track record. To me, it's just plain common sense to designate this group as the terrorist that they are and ban any activity in any Western nation. But we live in times where common sense is not so common, and so it took until today, November 19th, 2021, roughly 28 years after Hamas was created, for them to finally be outright and altogether banned in Great Britain. Hey, better late than never, as I said earlier, but still a bit of a head scratcher that it took this long for sure. I've said many times, we could use a man like Winston Churchill today, especially in the UK. Now, Hamas clearly banned by the United States for years, both wings, military and political. Again, we should not differentiate. It's been banned in the U.S. for years as a specially designated global terror organization.
Eric, thank you so much for letting us use your video as part of the Watchman, and you'll feel free to just type in Eric Stakelbeck into YouTube and you see lots of his videos. So again, thank you, Eric. But Paul, I have to ask you, why has it taken this government or previous governments 20 years from the banning of its military wing to banging its political wing, when we know there is no difference between its military wing and its political wing, because they have the same objectives: the total destruction of the state of Israel, the spread of extremist, radical Islamist ideas around the world, and also the support for the Muslim Brotherhood, who are prescribed as the godfather of international terrorism. So why has it taken our government now 20 years to realise that we've had a problem in nurturing Islamic terrorists with Islamic ideologies that want to see the destruction of Israel, but they also want to see the destruction of the West?
Well, I think it's been a problem for, as I said, the destruction of the West. We've been playing a fool's paradise for a very, very long time. I mean, just going back to this, it's one thing having links. It's, you know, you have to have links with China. They're running concentration camps. Nevertheless, this was an openly terrorist, anti-Semitic organisation, enslaving their own people, who incidentally vote for them. And I think this is part of it's a sort of delusional approach to life. Somehow there can be peace between Israel and an organisation that wants to destroy them, will not give up any opportunity to destroy them. They duck and weave, whether it's 1967 borders and then we'll start the war, or whether we'll have peace but we want the right of return. So this unknown definition of refugee, which goes from generation to generation to so I'm technically a refugee under that definition. So please UN and please British government can have some cookies from that. So they keep it going. So it's 5-6 million people returning, obviously to destroy the country. It's delusional. They're not peaceful. They don't have a peaceful ideology. As I suspect, part of it's slightly cynical. We've been playing with these delusional ideologies in a whole range of areas, radical groups and movements, assaults on our family life, as if each juncture doesn't really matter. And I suspect the ban has got, actually I'm not sure how much it's got to do with Israel. They should have faced up to it a long time ago and had a strong policy. Any movement that has a Nazi government ideology, I mean Iran does as well, but it is a government and we have to, as I say, we've got to somehow, but you don't have to play with this fire of international terrorism. But I suspect there's a reality. The Palestinians vote for this terrorist group. They win elections in Palestine.
I think they've only had one election. That was in 2005.
Yeah.
And then the Fatah, the ruling wing of the Palestinian Authority, realised that if they open up more elections, they could lose. So they wouldn't allow Hamas to take over Gaza, because remember, Israel disengaged from Gaza in the summer of 2005. That was followed on by parliamentary elections throughout the Palestinian Authority, including Gaza. Hamas won the Gaza elections. Then Fatah decided to cancel it. And then in 2007, we saw a coup d'etat where literally Hamas members threw Fatah members, fellow Palestinians, off the roofs of buildings and then took total control of the Gaza Strip, and then has created a terrorist entity in Gaza ever since, where they persecute Christians, they persecute anyone who doesn't support Hamas. They are constantly having problems with electricity. Huge amount of millions and millions, if not billions, of aid money is pouring into into Gaza. Hamas is using that money to build up arms and rockets and missiles and terror tunnels, and they're doing nothing to support the people in Gaza. They're also building luxury homes and smuggling huge amount of luxury goods through the tunnels from Egypt into Gaza, and doing nothing for their own people. I'd love to see, Israel's accused of occupying Gaza, but I'd like to see Gaza free, but that free of Hamas.
Well, I mean, that's the problem. It won't be free of Hamas because the Palestinian people seem to want Hamas. And we now have the Palestinian president of Fatah. I think he's on his 4th unelected term. You get one election one time, as they say in these
16
countries.
years he's been in office.
And I'm sure he's a very wealthy man. And I probably never told you the story, but I was once sponsored by a left-wing Israeli political party. They wanted a sort of a lawyer to help it was just when the peace treaties were kicking off, and it was about 97, 98. And Israel wanted to assist the Palestinians set up a judicial system, some form of court system where Palestinian citizens could arbitrate before a neutral judge, which we all take as normal. So I was piled over the Gaza Strip border, and I found myself in this luxury villa, and I mean luxury villa, I think it was the Minister of Justice home, and the sea was lapping up outside, and it was very comfortable. And I remember talking to an official, and I said something to him along the lines, we were discussing courts, and he said, you know, it literally was, everything went to the mullahs, and the mullahs determined it, and we were having a discussion, separate maybe bodies should be set up, that people can bring claims before, and it slipped out my mouth, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and that's, in law, that's a basic human rights treaty from the UN. It's equivalent to the European Convention, but for the world. And I just sit down, and he looked at me and said, "What's that?" No lawyer, certainly not working in the Palestinian Ministry of Justice, could not know that. And I said, "Well, you don't know this?" And he goes, "No." And I said, I mean, this is so basic. It's like, it's got stuff like due process in courts and hear the other side before you club them on the head, and, you know, let them have an opportunity to put their case. That's how basic it is. And he, you know, he studied at Gaza University. He only learnt Sharia law, and then it transpired I think he was the nephew of the Minister of Justice. So that's how the job opportunity, no doubt, came around. And it wasn't a very productive talk, as you can imagine.
Yeah. So with our Home Secretary Priti Patel's announcement to outlaw Hamas in its entirety, and it's going to be given to a vote in the House of Commons to actually ban Hamas, and then it will go into law. This is essentially what they're proposing to do, is that they want to stop Hamas from raising funds in the UK. They want to ensure that any funds challenged through institutions like the Gaza Islamic University are not available in the UK. And they want to stop the leading facility of advancing the technology used in Hamas's rockets and missiles development. So that's a big part of that as well. Plus also those who support Hamas could face a 15-year prison sentence. I think the Daily Mail had a headline article saying, if you call Hamas your friends and invite a Hamas representative to come and speak, you could face a 10-year prison sentence. And of course, we've seen that the hate fest rallies against Israel, that green and white flag being flown by Hamas, could also land someone in prison as well. And it looks pretty sure with the government's majority that they'll pass that legislation. But what do you think that would do in terms of helping to fight against terrorism, to help fight against the rise of Jew hatred and anti-Semitism, and just somewhere bring a bit of peace and reassurance to our beleaguered Jewish community in this country? Yes,
I mean, I think I want to just mention a few things on lawfare, just generally, because there's a lot happening. First, as soon as that's passed, all the left-wing groups will get together and bring a challenge in the High Court, saying it's contrary to freedom of speech and freedom of political activity. They're almost certainly going to do that. They're going to seek what's called a declaration of incompatibility, or if it's by regulation, I'm not sure how the government's going to do it, you can say it's against human rights directly. So it's going to be a challenge. They're going to use that as an opportunity to spin the freedom fighters of Hamas against the oppressive Jews. So that's going to happen. I'll just go to another juncture. Israel's got a tribunal in the International Criminal Court. It's, as usual, in effect, it's against Israel. This democracy is the only country of human rights, is the one on trial. You know, they don't put Syria in it, they don't put the Palestinians in it. That they delayed issuing the writ when President Trump was blocking it, because it wouldn't have gone through under him. But I think within 2 weeks of Biden winning the election, they bring the charges against Israel. All these events are happening, and as it happens, they're clever political demonstrations. So the flag is raised. There was a demonstration in London where they accused the Zionists of burning the Grenfell Towers. No prosecutions are brought. Nothing's done against this cricket player. The British government, it's not just a question of passive laws. the British government need to refer to Israel our friend.
Absolutely.
They need to go to the International Criminal Court and challenge the jurisdictional points and question why it's not being brought against the actual terrorists. Rather than the cosmetic way they do it, we'll be looking into all violations. They ought to have the Hamas leadership there, and they're in safe countries like Dubai. And the Jewish community needs support. They shouldn't have Jewish schools with guards outside it, which they have to do at heightened tensions. They shouldn't have their concerts disrupted. I mean, there was this convoy going through St. John's Wood, I think 3 or 4 months ago.
Back in May, yeah.
Back in May. They seemed to be total inactivity. No police seemed to be around. Jews were terrified, and I think after about 3 weeks, they arrested 2 people, I understand. It's part of the failure to address it. And so they need to step up their act, and they need to condemn this behaviour.
Absolutely.
It should have been, openly condemned as if a crowd of yobbos of football players had marched through.
So, Paul, you're the perfect guest to answer this question, and this is a question that I've been pondering for quite a while, and that is when we see anti-Israel demonstrations, they always chant, this is the Palestinian supporters, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Now, when we break down that slogan, that's an incitement to genocide because it's referring to the River Jordan, which is on the kind of east of Judea and Samaria or the West Bank, and to the sea, which is Israel, the Mediterranean. So effectively what they're calling for is genocide against the Jewish people and the collapse and destruction of the Jewish state. Why are we seeing no prosecutions being brought, and why don't the police investigate this? Because this is such a common chant at so many pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel rallies that this is an incitement to genocide. And why is it not being called out as such?
Well, I'm going to answer this question slightly indirectly, as I normally do. I was involved once in a case with a woman who'd been kidnapped by a Muslim gang, forced into marriage. We'd heard all these child abuse stories, and it required me to look into Rotherham. And as you know, about between 1,500 and 2,000 girls were raped in Rotherham under the police doing nothing. They saw it, they ignored it, they joked with people. They said the girls were consenting. The social services participated in this. They weren't very bothered. Parents complained. They said comments to the parents. I say participated, they might be overstating it, but they failed totally. They downplayed it. They minimised it. They said to parents phrases like, "You're just not accepting your daughters growing up." And this is like a 14-year-old girl going out with 50-year-old men. And throughout all that process, the British system was working. There was a social services inspectorate, there was the annual reviews, and every single time Rotherham Social Services got a clean bill of health. And it's not really been dealt with. There have been very few prosecutions on this. Most of the girls are just left because the state is not accepting its responsibilities in these matters. So we have these demonstrations. There's been a lot of it which has been totally unacceptable, totally unacceptable. I can understand it being a difficult situation. I can understand some of the prosecutions being difficult between free speech. I mean, a Palestinian, if I was their lawyer, would, yeah, we want to liberate Palestine. That's a political view. But we're not going to genocide the Jews. They'll be free and equal citizens, as we all believe they will be, in the future Palestinian state. So that'll be part of the fictitious position they're creating. But no one condemns it. No one condemns these violent demonstrations. I think they climb buildings, they pull things down.
And they've actually been trying to look and target to attack Jewish people as well, and any other kind of counter pro-Israel demonstration to counter it.
Yeah, well, you know, we have a problem, and there's 2 ways of dealing with it. Well, 3 ways. The way we're dealing with it, which is ignoring it and hoping if we tell ourselves everything will be fine, it will be fine. The second suggestion is to softly with it, or the third way is to actually clamp down on it. But we have to assert civilized Judeo-Christian values in this field.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this excellent video, and this one is called Hamas's terror spending since 1987.
Founded in 1987, Hamas is a terrorist organization which openly declares its intention to wipe Israel off the map. Here's how they have tried to further this goal over the years. Carrying out suicide bombs in restaurants, on buses, and in other public places. Carrying out terror attacks with guns and knives, kidnapping and murdering young Israelis, building terror tunnels from Gaza into Israel to attack and murder Israeli civilians. Launching more than 20,000 rockets at Israel over the past 20 years. After Israel unilaterally withdrew from the Gaza Strip in 2005, Hamas violently took control of the area, oppressing the Palestinian people, limiting freedom of expression and religion, and indoctrinating Palestinian children to become martyrs. Hamas uses the resources of the Palestinian people to fund its terrorist activities instead of investing in the welfare of its citizens. Instead of building schools or hospitals or buying vaccines, Hamas uses its resources for rockets and underground terror tunnels. Hamas is almost entirely sponsored by the Iranian regime, who shares its goal of annihilating Israel. Hamas also uses the Palestinian population in Gaza as human shields, launching rocket attacks at Israel from civilian areas. Since Hamas seized control of the Gaza Strip, Gaza's Christian population has been persecuted and has almost entirely disappeared. Israel is facing a violent and dangerous terrorist organization that seeks its destruction. No country would tolerate this, and neither will Israel.
And that excellent news report put together there by the Israeli Foreign Ministry, warning about the dangers of Hamas. And thanks got to go to the British government for for banning Hamas in its entirety. Just come back to you, Paul, on this one. So what do you make of the fact that if someone is a member now, once this legislation has gone through the House of Commons, it's then gone for a second reading in the House of Lords, comes back to the House of Commons where MPs have a final vote on it, then given to the Queen to sign, then becomes law and a statute, means that someone who could be supporting Hamas and express their support for Hamas could face a 14-year prison sentence. Do you think this will deter people from actually supporting Hamas, particularly those extreme left-wing groups that think that, you know, like those of Corbyn and his supporters?
Well, first, I think I'd just say, support your comment. Priti Patel is a rather beleaguered Home Secretary, but at least she's making tough decisions and doing these good decisions.
Absolutely.
Whatever the sort of, you know, well, I'm sure they're good motives, but I suspect it's something we need to take a firmer line on, and she's part of taking a firmer line. In terms of I mean, prescribing an organisation, you can see how serious it is. It's not lightly done, and that may be part of the reason for the delay, because people do support its organisation. To actually support it and face a 14-year prison sentence is draconian in anybody's books. I think it needed to be done because we need to clamp down this ideology. Of course, the funding will continue. It will be diverted into new groups, new organisations with very identical ideas. And that's why we've got to clamp down well, it could be never ending, but we have to work out how to clamp down on this ideology. But it can't get a root in Britain. Or the route it has in Britain can't be allowed to spread. And I think, we have to work with many of the decent, good-willed Muslims who are dramatically opposed, and they don't want this ideology to follow them to Britain. And I know there's some Muslims that even are supportive of Israel.
Oh, absolutely. And how do you think that Jeremy Corbyn would fare? According to the Daily Mail, it says here that Jeremy Corbyn faces 10 years in jail if he meets Hamas friends again, and that was the headline in the Daily Mail. So how would political figures who support Hamas, who support Hezbollah, who support these extreme Palestinian terrorist factions and terror organisations and giving them a political platform, how do you think he would fare under this legislation now, knowing that if he invited representatives of Hamas to Parliament, he himself could face a 10-year prison sentence?
Well, I think he'll avoid it. I think he's a clever, wily politician. You don't get where he is by doing it. But I think he may well lead the challenge to the legislation, be a figurehead for challenging it in the courts as part of lawfare. But I suspect he'll play within the roles because the penalties for an MP are very severe. I think one of the questions are, what do we mean by anti-Semitism? And it's very difficult to explain. If Corbyn met a Jew, would he be horrid to him? I think, of course not. But he's obsessed with Israel. I mean, all these countries cause violence. The only one country he's focusing on repeatedly is Israel. And it reminds me of sort of some of the comments by Ken Livingstone. If he met a Jew, would he do it? No, I'm sure he wouldn't. But he meets a Jewish reporter and he sends abuse against him when he was mayor of London. And they comment like, I think he was giving some example of Jews were buying other Jews to get out of Nazi Germany. And he puts a glee on it almost that their Jews are working with the Nazis, rather than these are desperate, persecuted, racial minority, which should tick all his boxes, and we need to support them in their one little homeland in Israel. But those links are not there.
Yeah, I just want to read out, this is what Theresa May said, and I'd like to know your thoughts on this one. So our Home Secretary, Priti Patel, not Theresa May, sorry, she's previous Secretary and Prime Minister, comments about banning Hamas, and this is what she wrote in a tweet. She says that Hamas has significant terrorist capabilities, including access to intensive and sophisticated weaponry, as well as terrorist training facilities. We've taken the view that we can no longer disintegrate between the sort of military and political side. It's based upon a wide range of intelligence, information, also links to terrorism. The severity speaks for itself. Hamas is fundamentally and rabidly anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism is enduring evil, which I will never tolerate. The Jewish people routinely feel unsafe at school, in the streets, when they worship in their homes and online. This step will strengthen the case against anyone who waves a Hamas flag in the United Kingdom, as an act is bound to make Jewish people feel unsafe. And it shows from that sentiment that she really does understand the plight of the Jewish community. She really does understand what Jew hatred is and what it does, and the need to protect the Jewish community. And this is a good start, is it?
No, I think it is a good start, and I think she does identify with it, and it is something that needs to be addressed. I think Jews are feeling very unsafe at the moment. I mean, it's become such a woke badge, the hatred of Israel, that every student unthinkingly now appears to adopt it. It seems to be the default position of our media. And we've seen these patterns before, and and we have this bizarre mixture now between the liberal left, I mean, Corbyn, Livingstone may be part of that, with the most darkest forces on the planet of terror and brutality and cruelty. And of course, Hamas give a new concept, because they're like Iran. They're a terrorist state. They have a state. They have the resources to launch missiles against Israel and blanket it through the summer.
And finally, on this subject, Paul, can you share with us what you've done in order to kind of block Hezbollah spokesmen from coming into this country? Because like Hamas, Hezbollah are again a genocidal terrorist organisation based up in southern Lebanon that are kind of more equipped than most European armies, have 160,000 rockets and missiles aimed at Israel. They are an terrorist arm of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And again, their high ideology is the destruction of Israel and the genocide against the Jewish people.
Yeah, well, that was, I think it was about 2011, and I was contacted by someone because the then Home Secretary Jackie Smith had invited a Hezbollah spokesperson into the country to address senior police officers on political Islam. They really had to learn a lot from Hezbollah, she felt. And I was instructed by this individual, he had links into the cabinet. This all I can, well, and so at the time there were these international arrest warrants against Israeli politicians. They were getting scared even to visit England, and the Labour government were not doing anything about it. They were encouraging it. Their foreign officers were no doubt ringing up the Israeli foreign office saying, oh, we're so worried about this, but they weren't taking any measures to stop it or protect them. They were letting it roll. And so I had a good look at some of these international arrest warrants against Israeli politicians, and shamefully I copied them, delete Israeli politician, insert Hezbollah spokesperson, you know, on the word processor, and we announced the minute he lands we're serving an international arrest warrant on him for war crimes against Jewish people. And there was this moment of standoff. I have to be honest, I was thinking, what happens if he actually does land? And he was thinking, I'm not going to let some little twit stop me coming to England. I'm sure that's what he was thinking. Anyway, he bottled and blinked first and cancelled the whole trip. Anyway, all I can say is about 2 weeks after that, I'm sure there's absolutely no connection whatsoever, I had the most ruthless tax investigation into me for 10 years of my accounts. And it was pretty tough going.
And now moving on to what you've been doing this year, and that's been trying to help Christians flee from the evil that is the Taliban in Afghanistan. Share with us what you've been doing to try and help get so many Christians out of Afghanistan with the Taliban in control of that country as it absolutely disintegrates. It's now going into a kind of famine where they can't feed their own people, and aid agencies are no longer working there. Well,
first I want to say something about the British Home Office, how I got involved in this. When we had the last crisis, and we remember the Christians were being genocided by ISIS in the Middle East, and we saw photographs of Yazidis on hilltops, you may remember, with fighting for their lives, we introduced the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme. It's exactly the same scheme we're using in Afghanistan. And we said we'd take 20,000, the same number we're taking from Afghanistan, over 5 years, so 4,000 a year, and they'd be selected by the UNHCR. And I think everyone expected there'd be Yazidis on it, Christians on it, but when the figures were published, 99% approximately was Sunni Muslim, the majority group, the safest group. And what many politicians suspect, including Lord Carey, is that the discrimination against Christians not only happened on the ground when their villages were burned, when their priests' throats were slit, when their churches were burnt, but it was also happening by the UNHCR, who was giving them less food stamps and not letting Christians access their facilities or making measures to enable them to access their facilities, and was selecting the majority Muslim. So I got involved in that, and we worked. I worked with Lord Carey to try and bump the Christian numbers up. And just bear in mind, our Home Office sat on that for 5 years, 99%. Those were the figures, and the Home Office has taken. They say they have, but I haven't seen an email they've sent, a letter they've sent, anything they've done to verify those figures. It's really appalling. And it's part of this sort of disinterest in Christians. They don't care. They're being genocided. We don't care. We don't care maybe about the Jews. It's the same attitude. It's a far-off land. Anyway, I found myself telephoned because of this work on WhatsApp, and it was an Afghan Christian, and he was absolutely terrified. And I think the whole thing that dawned on me is the chaos of the Biden administration, of the pull-out, the lack of protection, the lack of leaving £85 billion of equipment. And we were supporting an Islamic regime in Afghanistan. Make no mistakes, for all these years. It was issuing fatwas against Christians, had no religious freedom. That's who we were supporting, and it got worse. So anyway, these Christian families contacted me, and I had this sort of adventure of my life as I found people smugglers. Somebody I knew managed to get him on I was putting lots of stories together, put someone on a Glenn Beck plane. Have you heard about Glenn Beck? Yeah, he launched. He was fantastic. He had all these, it's amazing what he did. And there were planes in Afghanistan. I remember someone phoning me up from Afghanistan, and he was saying to me, he said, I've got him on the Glenn Beck flight. I said, it's not possible. I've heard the news reports. Biden has sealed the airport gates. I mean, Biden was doing all he could to cause trouble as far as people on the ground were concerned. He's put chains around the gates. And the chat rang me up, yeah, but gate number 5 is a Christian soldier. He's going to let them Christians through. Oh, it was just amazing, the work on the ground, what people were doing. Anyway, the family I know has made it to Pakistan, but so that's on that. I think I'll leave it at that, maybe.
No, appreciate that, and I think that could be a program for itself, Paul. Yeah. We're down to the last few minutes of the program, so anyone watching this program, particularly any young Christians who have a passion for law and want to do something good with it, they want to defend Israel, what course of action do you recommend that they take to defend Israel against the lawfare actions that have been taken against the Jewish state? And also we've seen with Priti Patel's incredible announcement to ban Hamas in its entirety.
I think what I would say is it's going to be a bit contradictory. I'm slightly telling you my route, but I think it did work because God, the Lord used it. Do your grind. If you're a young lawyer, do the grind, use your skills, but try and direct yourself into areas that you think would be useful: judicial review, constitutional law, maybe a bit of education law. Keep your purity in that sense. You're not in it for the money. Yes, we're all influenced by it, but keep your eye open for those cases. Obviously, join the organisations that you want to work and help with. But my experience is, like the BA Cross case, you'll be sitting at home one day and the case comes to you because the Lord says, do it.
Amen. And in 30 seconds, how can our viewers get behind you and support you, Paul, and the incredible work you've done over the last 2 decades in defending Christian freedom?
Well, if anyone wants to contact me, I've got a website there and there's an email on that, and that'll get through to me. So it's always great to hear from people.
Absolutely. And Paul, I just want to thank you so much for being my guest on the Middle East Report. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your experience, your stories, and we're in a debt of gratitude for you, not only for defending Christian freedoms in this country, but also defending Israel and the Jewish people. And I was very touched to hear about your story with your mother coming on the Kindertransport, which is an incredible story.
Pleasure. I'm glad to meet everyone. So good to be on your show, Simon.
And I just want to thank you all for watching today's Middle East Report. Certainly, we want to congratulate the British government for banning Hamas in its entirety, because it's a genocidal terrorist organisation that in its covenant charter calls for the destruction of the state of Israel and the Jewish people worldwide. And the government needs to be affirmed and congratulated on that historic and courageous decision. Also means that we shouldn't get complacent, that there are other terrorist organisations that have the same goals and the same networks that support Hamas, Hezbollah, the Islamic Republic of Iran, but it's also we should be vigilant and support the Christians who are being persecuted in the Middle East. So I want to thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.